Good morning. Your eyes are not deceiving you. I am not Reverend Jamie. He is enjoying a much well-deserved Sunday off, and so I get to have the joy of sharing opening words for our chalice lighting with you. And I've adapted some words from Gary Kowalski. The right of members to assemble and deliberate and vote on their spiritual affairs grows out of the same New England tradition that produced town meetings, where neighbors still gather each year to elect their councils and school boards and practice the sometimes, often, difficult art of self-rule. Now, Thomas Jefferson, whom we claim as one of the forerunners of our liberal faith, called town meeting, quote, the wisest invention ever devised by the wit of man for the perfect exercise of self-government and for its preservation. However, as he was from Virginia, he probably never attended one. Now, John Adams, another Unitarian from Massachusetts, was better acquainted with the often messy realities of both town and congregational meetings, and in the parish of Braintree, where he grew up, these gatherings became so heated that in the early 18th century, a rule had to be passed to stop people from standing up in their pews and shouting at one another. I now invite Henry to come forward and light our chalice in the honor of vigorous debate, which is essential to democracy, and the fireworks that are certainly part of our revolutionary tradition. So as we gather this morning, let there be a free and unhampered exchange of ideas, questions, and opinions. Democracy is not supposed to be tame or tidy or tepid. Thank you. And I believe that I am now going to invite you to join in a hymn, because I did not bring the order of service up with me, but I believe that I'm going to invite you to rise and body your spirit to sing Here We Have Gathered, number 360 in your gray hymnal, which is also the cloth hymnal.
Welcome to First Parish in Bedford, a Unitarian Universalist congregation where in our hundreds of years of gathering, we have been working our way ever toward deeper truths and better lives together. Whoever you are, whomever you love, whether you worship one God, many gods, or no God, you are welcome here. We welcome those joining us virtually on Zoom. We welcome old friends who are joining us from afar, who we love and miss. We welcome all those who are joining us for the first time. And if you are joining us for a first or second or third time and you want to get more in touch, you can fill out a blue card in your pew, or online. You can go to uubedford.org/newcomers/contact-us. After worship today in our community hour in our common room, we have a table for caring cards, and the lay pastoral care team wanted me to share with you all a little bit about what that means for any who don't know. Our lay pastoral care team, which is a group of members who try to reach out to those who may need support and make sure that people in this parish are feeling that love that we have for one another, put out cards for anyone who may have experienced a recent loss, hardship, medical issue, so that people in the community can sign the cards and mail them off, and people will feel some of our love. So check that out in Community Hour. This coming Friday, we have a program that we are, for now, calling Pizza and Arguments. Not because we intend to have actual arguments, but because we hope to engage in multi-generational conversation with folks of all ages about the topic of social norms. And we hope to eat pizza while we do it. So people of all ages are invited to join us this Friday evening here in the community, in the common room, for pizza and some kind of discussion. We also will have a discussion after church, after service next week on Sunday the 28th about the future of faith. What is the future looking like for congregations in general, for Unitarian Universalism, and for this community in particular? Doug Mutter will be facilitating and bringing us some food for thought. It will be put on by the Adult Faith Development subgroup. And so please join us on Zoom or in person. There'll be some light sandwiches for those joining in person. And then one other plug, the cabaret is coming up on March 2nd, Saturday, March 2nd at 7 p.m. That's pretty exciting. And if you want to be a performer in our cabaret, performers of all ages, and especially of the younger ages, are strongly encouraged to be in touch with our youth choir director, Natan Wythe, about your singing act, your musical act, your skit, your stand-up comedy, you name it, bring it. We want to see it. It's going to be a blast. And with that, I will invite you to rise in body or in spirit and join in saying our unison affirmation printed in your order of worship. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. El amor es el espíritu de esta iglesia, y el servicio es su ley. Este es nuestro gran pacto, vivir juntos en paz, buscar la verdad en el espíritu de amor y ayudarnos los unos a los otros.
Thanks, Kath. I should have given you a heads up on that. I need 3 volunteers, one from like over there, one from like in here, and one from over there. And I need 3 volunteers, so I need a hand so I can pick one from over here, one from over here. You will not have to talk. You will not be made a fool of. Fantastic. You're going to be my person there. Wonderful. Emily, yep, you can come around, and I need somebody from over here. Bob, thank you. Okay, so I want you to come here, come to the center, and I want you to approach here as though you are driving a car and you want to make a left turn. Okay. You guys just had an accident. Do you realize that? You went kerplunk. And you are approaching, and you still don't know how to turn left because there's an accident over there, and I'm here. So how are you turning left into me? Right? Thank you. You all may sit down now. Now, those of us who are licensed drivers, we actually would know what to do when we approach an intersection, right? I mean, I hope so, right? That is a social contract that we all agree to. And we agree to it because there's been a decision made about how we do that. And there's different ways we make decisions when we are in a situation with people, whether it's approaching an intersection or what are we going to do for social justice in the community this year. We have ways that we expect people to have conversations and make decisions. We can make decisions through authority. Well, the state of Massachusetts says that if you approach at a four-way stop, blah, 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 that's authority. But it's not completely authority. It's also majority, and it's also consensus. Because it was originally, how did we get rules of the road? Well, when people are on horses and they approached an intersection, they just hollered at each other. Hey, you gonna turn left? Yeah, I'm gonna turn left, but you can turn left first. You can turn first, right? But now we're inside cars. How are you supposed to you can roll down a window? Not in today's weather, right? So we have to have an agreed upon way. But it isn't just the state of Massachusetts had one person who said, hey, here are the rules of how you're going to turn left. There was a democratic process to put people in place, to put officials in place. That was a majority process. But then when those majority process people got into a room together, they had consensus decisions on how we're going to behave on the road and how we're going to make these decisions. So even decisions that might seem like they're coming down from on high, there could be all these hidden layers in them. But also, we have the responsibility to engage in all of those processes along the way, right? We have a responsibility as a citizen, we have a responsibility as a person to use our voice when we're trying to make a decision in consensus, which for those of you that are a little bit on the younger side today, we're gonna be talking more about what consensus is and what majority is and what authority is. And we need to think about how all these different ways of decision making affect the different ways we move in the world. So, thank you all very much for listening. I now invite, and thank you for our volunteers. You're good sports, appreciate it. And I'm sorry about the car accident. You can contact your insurance company later. I now invite you all to join in singing the Children's Blessing as pre-K to 5th goes to the Overlook Room and 6th and 7th goes to Room 204.
Good morning. I'm Dorothy Anderson Perales, and I'm here to give you a climate justice moment. Mostly, I want to tell you first something that I love doing. I love getting into nature with my dog, walking in the woods. In fact, I consider it essential to my spiritual well-being and my mental health. Most mornings, surrounded by trees, I close my eyes and I take a little pause, and I just notice, what do I feel? What do I hear? The sound of wind in the branches, maybe the sound of my breathing, some birds, a little distant traffic, bits of ice falling onto the snow. Oh, and what's that? It's a private jet roaring overhead. And, you know, on Sundays when I walk on a trail bordering Hanscom Field, a private jet flies overhead every few minutes. Close enough that I feel I could wave at the few people on board and point out the breed of my dog, Australian Shepherd, by the way. I know there are a lot of demands on our time, and as individuals it can be overwhelming to think about what can I do to make a difference. But in a democracy, our power comes from taking to heart the role and responsibility each of us have to use our voice and speak up for what we think is just and what matches our values. As my girls have grown into teenagers and become more independent, I have found I have a little bit more time that I've intentionally assigned to climate justice work. Now, there were countless other social justice causes that called my name, but I picked one. I've been to New York City with other members of our congregation, marching to call on the federal government to stop the expansion of new fossil fuel development. I've been to the State House, again with members of this congregation, delivering a petition with 10,000 signatures to the governor, asking for her to consider stopping the expansion of private jets at Hanscom or anywhere. I've stood on Bedford standouts here by the Common or past the Common with a sign in hand. But some people say, how do you know it's going to make a difference? Like, climate change is already happening. And I think, you know what? I don't actually worry much about whether or not what I'm doing is making a difference. I am more aware of how it feels to me to stand up and participate in something that I feel is very important and close to my heart. I don't want to regret one day that I didn't use my voice. I'm here on behalf of the Environmental Justice Committee to call on like-minded people to take a stance on an issue that hits close to home and reaches wide. I was inspired and informed by the talk that Katie Winchell gave us here on January 7th. She is a part of the coalition to stop private jet expansion at Hanscom or anywhere. And many of the facts she shared were new to me, and we heard that they were new to a number of you, or many people. So I'm going to repeat a couple of them that really resonated with me. Firstly, Massport owns and operates Hanscom Field, which is a general aviation airport. This is a separate entity from Hanscom Air Force Base, which is a non-flying base with no airport runways. It is Massport that our activism is directed at, not Hanscom Air Force Base. A lot of people, including me, do not actually know that specific distinction. Working to stop the expansion of private jets is not at odds with our appreciation of the service of military personnel and families who are our neighbors at the base. Here's a fact. The proposed build-out of new hangars is for the exclusive use of luxury private jets. We understand this project to be the largest luxury private jet expansion proposal in the United States. And here's a particularly exasperating and raging point. Even without this expansion, private jet emissions at Hanscom Field already cancel nearly half the climate gains from all solar panels ever installed in Massachusetts. Did you hear that? Do you want emissions from private jets to cancel out the efforts of solar panels on our homes and on buildings across Massachusetts? Do you want the emissions from private jets canceling out the climate gains from the solar panels on our church that we had to sue the town to install? Private jet travel is the height of environmental injustice because it allows a small number of people to pollute our world in such an unconstrained way at the expense of the vulnerable many. But some people have asked, when is the vote on this, Dorothy? There's no vote. This expansion will go forward unless we stop it. What can we do? We are a church that gets informed. We are a community that takes a stance. We are a congregation that leaves the building to stand up for justice. We are a people of action participating in democracy. Here's what you can do. Sign the petition to the governor. We are still collecting signatures. Put a sign in your yard. Make a donation to the coalition. Join the Environmental Justice Committee here at First Parish, or one of the groups in the coalition, like Mothers Out Front or the Third Act. In a few weeks, there's a period for public comment on this expansion project. Join the Environmental Justice Committee after services. Write letters with us for this public comment period. They will take handwritten letters or electronic emails. You can join us and write them together. And you can get a fact sheet about what I've talked about and, pamphlets about this at our table, the Environmental Justice Committee table. And also tell people you know. I think that's an act of democracy too, right? We can talk. Tell people. Spread the news. Let's have a voice. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dorothy, for that powerful testimony. And I invite you to now use your voice in singing as we join in our hymn number 145 as Tranquil Streams.
Good morning. Much better. I'm Lori Groves. I'm a member of the Lay Pastoral Care Team. And one of the things that we do at each service is stand by the candle stand so you can light your candles of joy and concern. We ask that you keep your comments brief so that we don't take up too much of the service. And please state your name and speak clearly. And I'll be up at the candle stand after the service in case anyone would like to light any candles in private. For all of the joys and concerns that we carry with us. And again, I'll be here after the service if anyone would like to light a candle in private.
This is indeed a community that is hard to leave even when you have to move away. A community of deep care for one another, where we hold each other's sorrows and where we share hope with one another, lest we get too infected with despair. I invite you to give generously to sustain this congregation and this community that holds so many people in its loving embrace. This morning's offering will be gratefully received. Making decisions in groups can sometimes be a challenge. Has anybody else ever found it difficult to make a decision in a group? Yeah, I thought so. Just last night, I was with some friends, and we were trying to decide which board game we should play. Well, I'm fine with any of those options. Oh, me too. Well, they all seem good to me. Sure. I was thinking in my mind about all the decision-making processes I could suggest. We could do a majority vote out loud. We could use a secret ballot. We could use ranked choice voting. We could use five-finger voting for modified consensus. And I have, in fact, used all of those decision-making methods before. I've used a secret ballot here at church with our junior youth group to decide on activities and movies when I didn't want the youth to be influenced by peer pressure. I've used ranked choice voting in both of our youth groups when choosing a social cause that we wanted to either donate to or do a service project for. And I use five-finger voting, modified consensus, in my house when we're making decisions as a household, including things like, what model do we use to figure out who gets what portion of equity in the house we've purchased together? We also use that same decision-making method on the board of the Beyond Bond and Legal Defense Fund that I'm a part of. Adrienne Murray Brown, who is an activist and author I regularly quote, defines democracy as making decisions about resources together. On the podcast How to Citizen, which is hosted by Baratunde Thurston, she was a guest, and she said this: "There's this group called Movement Generation who I adore, and they define economy as the management of home, the management of the resources of home, which I really love, because they're like, any time we're talking about how we manage our shared resources of the earth, of the community, of our family, that's an economic conversation. And so to me, democracy is in that vein. I'm like, we're talking about how do we make decisions about our resources, including the resource of time, the resource of money, the resource of land, the resource of food, the resource of water, the resource of air, the resource of education. Making decisions about resources is something that we do all the time. And in fact, Brown emphasizes this fact when she's leading workshops. I attended a workshop once that she was leading, and she asked a series of questions that she also talks about in this same podcast. She starts asking people, well, how many of you practice democracy at home? And if people sort of look confused, she clarifies, do you sit down and talk together about how you're going to spend your shared resources as a household? Do you talk about what methods you're using and how you're sharing time and who has decision-making power? So then a lot of people raise their hands. Yes, we do that. And then she asks, are the kids involved? Well, some hands go down. And then she asks, what about in your neighborhood, on your block? Do you do that in your neighborhood? And then a lot of more hands go down. Her point is not to do a gotcha, like, aha, you don't really practice democracy. Her point is that we want this large-scale democracy to work, but it's actually really hard to practice even at a pretty small scale. And I think that's a fair point. If we can't do neighborhood democracy, like, okay, how are we going to make sure that the sidewalks get de-iced, or how are we going to use this park in a way that's equitable and works for all different kinds of families and pets and things? Well, then how are we going to do it on a whole big national scale? But on the other hand, I think we do it. You do it. We UUs love to practice democracy. And it is a part not only of the current 7 principles that make up our bylaws, but also of the new draft of Article 2 that contains these values we've been exploring this year in our worship. The justice value that we've been exploring this month reads, we work to be diverse, multicultural, beloved communities where all thrive. We covenant to dismantle racism and all forms of systemic oppression. We support the use of inclusive, democratic processes to make decisions within our congregations, our association, and society at large. In a piece for Braver Wiser, which is a regular spiritual nourishment bit that comes out from the UUA, a UU young adult, Shia French, writes about a foundational experience with democracy at a UU youth conference. You may be familiar with it. Shia writes, I was 17 when I learned what democracy was. I was with 75 young people at the Youth Empowerment and Spirituality UU Conference on Star Island as we chose our leader for next year's conference. It had only been a week, but I loved these people, and I was so damn impressed. The candidates had given short speeches about their hopes and commitments and left the room. We were left to decide. Each person who spoke did so constructively and kindly. People spoke about the candidates' leadership skills and how they felt in their presence. One friend of a candidate shared some concerns about that potential leader managing many competing priorities, and then we voted anonymously. In the 7 years since I bridged, I don't think I've been part of an election process run by adults that was so loving. What set this experience with Yes on Star apart for Shia wasn't that it was an effective and well-run or well-debated election. It was that it was loving. This democracy was loving. Can you imagine that? I can imagine it here at First Parish. I can imagine it at our annual meeting. I can imagine us sitting in those pews and someone raising a concern about the budget in a loving, respectful manner with honor for the people who put it together. And I can imagine people responding in a loving, respectful manner without defensiveness. I've even seen it. But when we start to zoom out a little bit, when you think about maybe a town meeting or a school board meeting or, God forbid, national politics, It's harder to imagine a loving democracy. National politics honestly do regularly fill me with despair. You were spot on to try to give us some hope, Mr. Doherty. On New Year's Eve this year, I did not feel celebratory. All I could think was, I don't want it to be 2024. Which isn't to say that I avoid national. I don't think I could, even if I tried. Just this week, I've been part of planning an interfaith vigil for grief and courage in conjunction with Ayanna Presley's office in support of a ceasefire. And I've also been part of a team planning to meet with Senator Elizabeth Warren's staffers about the conditions at the Plymouth County Jail that holds people for immigration. Like you all, I call my reps and I write my reps, and I do what I can to make my voice heard, just like Dorothy, marching in New York, or going to the State House, or joining a coalition to stop private jet expansion. I hear John Gibbons used to lead a chant here sometimes, and I'm gonna see if we still know it. Show me what democracy looks like.
This is what democracy looks like.
Show me what democracy looks like.
This is what democracy looks like.
Good, you still got it. I learned that chant at Occupy Wall Street in New York City, which I was part of as a seminary student when I lived in New York. And I learned a lot about democracy at Occupy Wall Street. I learned about a couple different kinds of democracy. I learned about the pushy kind of democracy. I learned about the whose streets, our streets, about the people power versus the corporate power, about the demanding and disrupting, about the police who will push you back literally, physically, and about the crowds taking over the bridge. And sometimes we need that kind of democracy, because sometimes we need to stop private jet expansion before it happens, and nobody's gonna ask us for a vote. Sometimes we need to get rid of the restrictive abortion laws, and nobody's gonna stop and ask nicely. And I also learned about another kind when I was there. I learned about the decision-making kind, the large-scale assemblies run with a people's mic where all different voices were heard, and it took 7 billion hours, but it was run democratically. I learned about sharing resources where the kitchens were whatever people could bring together and anyone who came was fed. I learned about having decision-making through conversations and conversations. And I value and I practice both kinds of democracy. The in the streets kind, the kind where I push my reps, the kind where we organize to show collective power, and also the kind that Shaya talked about in the youth conference, the loving democracy, the inclusive democracy demanded by our own UU values. And when I get really overwhelmed by the state of things, which is most of the time, I think about Adrienne Marie Brown's fractal theory of change, that what we practice at the smallest level spirals out and becomes the whole. And that means that we have to practice democracy, practice it on every level. And that includes taking the concerns of our neighbor seriously, even when the concerns of our neighbor are something that is ill-informed or ignorant or absurd. Even when we want to roll our eyes and scream. And maybe we should roll our eyes and scream privately, but rolling our eyes and screaming publicly doesn't seem to really actually help all that much. I'm currently partway through reading Naomi Klein's book, Doppelganger, which I know some of you have read and at least one of you has recommended to me. It's a fascinating book about going into what she calls the mirror world. Naomi Klein, this leftist writer who's tackled corporate power and climate change, she often apparently gets confused online with Naomi Wolf, a very different Naomi, who she calls the other Naomi, who moved from sort of being a liberal feminist to being like a right-wing pundit. And so as Naomi Klein was watching this other Naomi shift into this mirror world, she started to learn a lot about the mirror world. And I'm only partway through, but one of the takeaways that I found really salient was about how the pro-vaccine efforts in this country failed to take seriously the concerns about surveillance and government overreach held by vaccine-hesitant folks. Klein makes the point that she herself has written about government surveillance and its evils. And while, of course, vaccines don't have trackers in them and the vaccine apps are not nefarious, the truth is there is nefarious surveillance happening all the time in our phones, in our laptops, in our Alexas, and in our Ring doorbells. And so instead of saying, no, that's crazy, just shut up and get vaccinated, people could have said, well, that's a really valid fear. I want to finish Doppelganger and learn more. But this takeaway about taking people's concerns seriously really stuck with me, probably because it's not easy for me. But what I took away was that an important thing to do is find the shared concern behind the concern. Because usually there is a shared concern if you go deep enough. One thing I think about is how, with the influx of migrants we've had into our communities, some people have said, well, this isn't right because what about housing veterans? And that makes me want to roll my eyes and scream and say, stop being racist. But the truth is, it's a valid concern. Everyone should have housing. And I could say instead, that's really real. Everyone should have housing, including definitely veterans. And what can we do about that? There's housing legislation we can talk about. We need to keep practicing all the kinds of democracy. We are going to need a truly massive amount of people standing up against the money and the guns, standing up against the corporate power and refusing and disrupting, and saying this is what democracy looks like in order to shift things to a life-sustaining direction in this country. And in order to get there, we are going to need to build coalitions like we've never built them before. Coalitions that are founded on loving democracy. Coalitions that we build by listening to our neighbors and taking their concerns seriously and saying this is what democracy looks like. Keep showing each other what it looks like until we get there. I'm going to lead us in a closing song that I like to sing when I'm not feeling very hopeful. And it's called We Are Going, or sometimes called Music, a nice generic name for a song. So repeat after me the words and call in response. We are going, to a place where music, falls and fills up everything. And though it might be a long time, I know it's going to be all right. Because we've already started to sing. We'll do singing call and response. We are going. To a place where music. Falls and fills up everything. Falls and fills up everything. And though it might be a long time, I know it's gonna be all right. 'Cause we've already started to sing. All together. We are going to a place where music falls and fills up everything. And though it might be a long time, I know it's gonna be 'cause we've already started to sing. We are going to a place where music falls and fills up everything. And though it might be a long time, I know it's gonna be alright, 'cause we've already started to sing. Last time. We are going to a place where music falls and fills up everything. And though it might be a long time, I know it's gonna be alright, 'cause we've already started to sing. We have already started to sing, and we have already, and for a long time, been practicing democracy. Let us keep going and keep practicing and keep singing.